The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Portland as Detective Sarah Chun arrived at Pioneer Courthouse Square. The smell of fresh coffee from nearby cafes mixed with the lingering scent of yesterday's rain on concrete. What should have been a peaceful Saturday was about to become anything but ordinary. The call had come in at 6:47 a.m. Assault with a paint weapon, the dispatcher had said, but Sarah knew there was more to it. There always was when protests were involved. She adjusted her badge and walked toward the small crowd that had gathered near the bronze statue. Marcus Williams stood silent in the center of it all. Red paint dripped from his weathered face onto his pristine military dress uniform. The 34-year-old Marine veteran had been on his way to a memorial service when someone had thrown a bucket of paint at him. His blue eyes remained steady despite the chaos around him, but Sarah could see the hurt beneath his calm exterior. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notepad. Marcus straightened his shoulders, muscle memory from years of military training taking over. "I was walking to the Veterans Memorial for Tommy Hernandez's ceremony," Marcus said quietly. "Kid died in Afghanistan 3 months ago. His family asked me to speak." He wiped paint from his mouth with the back of his hand. Someone in a black mask came out of nowhere, threw this stuff at me, and ran. Sarah looked around the square. About 50 people had gathered, some taking photos with their phones, others arguing loudly about what they had witnessed. A group of protesters with signs reading "No More Wars" stood on one side, while veterans and their families clustered protectively around Marcus. "Did anyone get a good look at the person who did this?" Sarah called out to the crowd. Several people raised their hands, but their descriptions varied wildly. Some said the attacker was tall, others claimed they were short. Male, female, young, old, nobody seemed to agree on anything except the black mask. An elderly woman named Betty Morrison stepped forward. She had been feeding pigeons when the incident occurred. "That young person came running from over there." She pointed toward the food trucks lined up on the west side of the square. "Had something in their hands, threw it right at this poor man, then disappeared into the crowd." Sarah made notes while studying the scene. The paint was still wet, creating a small red puddle on the concrete. She noticed something unusual about the splatter pattern. It seemed intentional, almost artistic. This wasn't random violence. "Marcus, do you have any idea why someone would target you specifically?" Sarah asked. "Have you received any threats recently?" Marcus shook his head. "I keep a low profile. Work construction, go to VA meetings, visit my mom on Sundays. Nothing controversial." He paused, looking down at his ruined uniform. "This was my dress blues from when I got promoted to sergeant. Can't replace these." A commotion erupted near the food trucks. Someone was shouting, and Sarah saw a young person in dark clothing pushing through the crowd. She couldn't make out their features from this distance, but something about their movements suggested urgency, maybe panic. "Stay here," Sarah told Marcus. "I'll be right back." She jogged toward the disturbance, her hand instinctively moving to her radio. As she got closer, she could hear heated voices arguing about what had just happened. "They had it coming," someone yelled. "Military-industrial complex destroys everything." "That's a person, not a symbol," another voice shot back. "Show some respect." Sarah pushed through the crowd and found herself face-to-face with a group of young protesters. They wore matching T-shirts with anti-war slogans, and several carried homemade signs. Their leader, a woman with purple hair named Alex Rivera, stepped forward. "Officer, that soldier represents everything wrong with this country," Alex said boldly. "We're making a statement about American imperialism by assaulting a veteran who was going to a memorial service." Sarah replied, her voice remaining professional despite her growing anger. "That's not protest, that's criminal behavior." Alex's expression faltered slightly. "Memorial service?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Sarah realized that whoever threw the paint might not have known where Marcus was going or why he was in uniform. This was looking less like a targeted attack, and more like a case of mistaken assumptions. She pulled out her phone and showed Alex a photo of the paint-covered veteran. "His name is Marcus Williams. He was walking to honor a fallen soldier who died serving his country. Does your cause really justify what happened to him. The confidence drained from Alex's face as she stared at the photo. Several other protesters gathered around to look, their expressions shifting from defiant to uncertain. Sarah could see doubt spreading through the group like ripples in a pond. "We didn't know," Alex whispered. "We thought he was here to counter-protest our demonstration." "Well, he wasn't," Sarah said firmly. "And now someone in your group has committed assault. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." The crowd around them had grown larger, with both protesters and veteran supporters listening to every word. Cell phone cameras captured everything, and Sarah knew this incident was probably already spreading across social media. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Back at the Square Center, Marcus sat on a bench while paramedics checked him over. The paint had gotten into his eyes, causing irritation, and there were small cuts on his face from debris that had been mixed with the paint. His uniform was completely ruined, the red paint having soaked through to his white undershirt. An older veteran named Frank Rodriguez knelt beside Marcus, offering him a bottle of water. 23 years in the Army, Frank said quietly. "Never saw combat like this on home soil." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Frank. At least nobody got seriously hurt." Even covered in paint and dealing with his own trauma, Marcus was thinking about others' safety. Sarah returned to find the scene had grown more complex. News crews were arriving, drawn by reports of the incident spreading on social media. She could see the familiar vans of local television stations parking nearby, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. "This is about to become a circus," Sarah muttered to her partner, Detective Tom Hayes, who had just arrived. Tom nodded grimly as he surveyed the growing crowd. "City Hall's getting calls," Tom said. "Mayor wants a full report by noon. Both sides are claiming this proves their point about the other." He handed Sarah a printed email. "This just came in from the protest organizers. They're saying this was an isolated incident by someone not affiliated with their group." Sarah read the email quickly. The protest had been planned for weeks, with proper permits and police notification. It was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration against military spending, not a confrontation with individual veterans. Now, everything had spiraled out of control because of one person's impulsive action. A young journalist named Patricia Vance approached with her camera crew. "Detective, can you comment on reports that this was a hate crime against veterans?" "We're still investigating," Sarah replied carefully. "No charges have been filed yet." She knew that whatever she said would be analyzed and criticized by both sides. Marcus slowly stood up, paint still dripping from his uniform. The crowd quieted as he walked toward the group of protesters who had been arguing with police. Sarah tensed, unsure what the veteran intended to do. The last thing they needed was more confrontation. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely to Alex Rivera. "I heard you say you didn't know why I was here. I'd like to explain, if you're willing to listen." Alex looked surprised, but nodded. The cameras focused on them as Marcus began to speak, his voice calm despite everything he had endured. What happened next would change everything about this day, but nobody could have predicted it. The plaza fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the clicking of camera shutters. Two worlds were about to collide in a way that would challenge everyone's assumptions about patriotism, protest, and the true meaning of both. Marcus Williams stood before the group of protesters, red paint still wet on his face, creating an almost surreal scene. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the plaza as dozens of cell phones recorded every moment. What he said next would either calm the situation or make it explode. "My name is Marcus Williams," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I enlisted in the Marines when I was 18, right after September 11th. I believed I was protecting people." He paused, wiping paint from his chin. "I still believe that." Alex Rivera shifted uncomfortably. Up close, she could see that Marcus was younger than she had initially thought, probably not much older than herself. The paint had made him look like a wounded warrior from some ancient battle. "But I'm not here today as a soldier," Marcus continued. "I'm here as a friend." Tommy Hernandez was 19 years old when he stepped on an IED outside Kandahar. He loved skateboarding, pizza, and terrible horror movies. "His mom asked me to speak at his memorial because I was with him when he died. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the news crews seemed to sense this was a moment that required respect. Detective Sarah Chun watched from nearby, her hand no longer near her radio. The tension was shifting, but she couldn't tell which direction it was heading. Tommy joined the military because his family couldn't afford college, Marcus said. He wasn't trying to build an empire or start wars. He was trying to earn money for school so he could become a teacher. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. He used to say he wanted to teach kids that there were better ways to solve problems than fighting. Alex felt tears welling up in her eyes. This wasn't the story she expected to hear. Behind her, other protesters were lowering their signs, their anger replaced by confusion and something that might have been shame. I don't expect you to agree with every decision our government makes, Marcus continued. Hell, I don't agree with all of them either. But when you threw paint at this uniform, you weren't making a statement about policy. You were dishonoring Tommy's memory. An older protester named David Kim stepped forward. He had served in Vietnam decades ago and now opposed military interventions, creating an internal conflict that had driven him to join today's demonstration. Son, I wore a uniform too. Different war, same questions about whether it was right. Marcus turned to David with respect. Then you understand. We can disagree about politics and still honor the people who served. He gestured to his ruined uniform. This isn't about being pro-war or anti-war. This is about remembering that every name on every memorial was a person somebody loved. Detective Chun noticed movement in the crowd. Someone in dark clothing was pushing through the protesters, trying to reach the front. The person wore the same black mask that witnesses had described, and Chin's instincts immediately went on alert. That's them, Betty Morrison shouted, pointing at the masked figure. That's the one who threw the paint. The crowd surged as people turned to look. The masked person stumbled and nearly fell before regaining their balance. Chin moved quickly, calling for backup as she pushed through the crowd toward the suspect. Stop right there, Chun commanded, but the masked figure began to run. They dodged between protesters and bystanders, heading toward the street where traffic was beginning to back up from the commotion. Tom Hayes appeared from the other side, cutting off the escape route. The masked person stopped, trapped between the two detectives and the crowd. Their breathing was rapid and panicked, visible through the black fabric covering their face. Remove the mask, Chun ordered. Slowly, the figure's hands shook as they reached up and pulled off the black ski mask. The crowd gasped collectively. Standing before them was Jamie Chun, no relation to the detective despite sharing a last name. Jamie was 17 years old, with short brown hair and wide, terrified eyes. Oh my God, Alex Rivera whispered. Jamie, what did you do? Jamie was a high school senior who had been attending protests with Alex's group for several months. They were passionate about social justice, but inexperienced in the realities of activism. Their parents thought they were at the library studying for finals. I didn't mean for this to happen, Jamie said, tears streaming down their face. I saw the uniform and I got so angry about everything. The wars, the military budget, all of it. I wasn't thinking about the person wearing it. Marcus stepped forward, and several people in the crowd tensed, unsure what the veteran would do when faced with his attacker. Detective Chun prepared to intervene if necessary, but Marcus moved slowly and deliberately. How old are you? Marcus asked gently. 17, Jamie whispered. Same age as I was when I decided to enlist, Marcus said. I was angry about a lot of things too. Still am, sometimes. He studied Jamie's face carefully. What are you angry about? Jamie looked confused by the question. They had expected shouting, maybe arrest, certainly not a conversation. Everything, they said helplessly. Climate change, inequality, endless wars. It feels like the world is falling apart, and nobody cares. I care, Marcus said simply. That's why I served. That's why I'm here today, honoring Tommy. He cared too. He gestured to his paint-covered uniform. But caring doesn't give you the right to attack people. Detective Chun approached carefully. She had to make an arrest. Assault was assault, regardless of the attacker's age or motivation. But she was also witnessing something remarkable happening between the victim and the perpetrator. Jamie Chun, You're under arrest for assault in the fourth degree, Chen announced, pulling out her handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read the Miranda rights, Marcus interrupted. Wait, before you take them away, can I say something? Chen paused. This was highly irregular, but nothing about this situation was following normal procedures. She nodded reluctantly. Marcus looked directly at Jamie. I'm not going to press charges on one condition. The crowd stirred with surprise. Even Detective Chun raised an eyebrow. I want you to come to Tommy's memorial service with me. I want you to meet his mother and hear about who he really was. Jamie's eyes went wide. You want me to come to the funeral of someone whose memory I disrespected? I want you to understand that your anger is valid, but how you express it matters, Marcus replied. Tommy would have agreed with a lot of what you're protesting. He just chose a different way to try to make a difference. Alex Rivera spoke up. Marcus, that's incredibly generous, but Jamie needs to face consequences for their actions. This is a consequence, Marcus said firmly. Learning the truth is always a consequence. Understanding the human cost of your choices is always a consequence. He turned back to Jamie. Will you come? Detective Chen found herself in an impossible situation. She couldn't just ignore an assault, but she also couldn't ignore a victim's request not to press charges. She looked at her partner, who shrugged helplessly. I'll need to discuss this with my supervisor, Chun said. In the meantime, Jamie, you're being detained for questioning. She secured the handcuffs, but didn't tighten them aggressively. The news crews were having a field day. Patricia Vance whispered excitedly into her microphone as her cameraman captured every moment. This story was evolving far beyond what anyone had expected. Jamie's phone buzzed in their pocket. Chun retrieved it and saw dozens of text messages from friends who had seen the incident spreading on social media. The story was already being shared with hashtags like #paintprotester and #veteranattacked, though none of the online commentary captured the complexity of what was actually happening. My parents are going to kill me, Jamie said quietly. They're going to be disappointed, Marcus corrected. There's a difference, and sometimes disappointment is the first step toward growth. As they prepared to move toward the police cars, Tommy's mother, Maria Hernandez, arrived at the plaza. She had been wondering why Marcus was late for the memorial service and had come looking for him. When she saw his paint-covered uniform and the crowd of cameras, she stopped in shock. Marcus, what happened to you? Maria called out, rushing toward them. She was a small woman in her 50s, dressed in black for her son's memorial, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a folded American flag. The crowd parted respectfully as Maria approached. She took in the scene. The protesters, the police, the paint covering Marcus's uniform, and the handcuffed teenager who was clearly distraught. Mrs. Hernandez, Marcus said gently, I'm sorry I'm late. There was an incident, but we're handling it. Maria studied Jamie with eyes that held both pain and wisdom. She had buried her only child 3 months ago, and grief had given her a perspective that cut through surface judgments. You did this to him? She asked Jamie directly. Jamie nodded, unable to speak. Maria was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed Tommy in his dress uniform, smiling broadly, with Marcus standing beside him. They were both young, both proud, both alive. This is my son, Maria said, showing the photo to Jamie. He was going to college after his service ended. He wanted to teach elementary school. She looked at the ruined uniform, then back at Jamie. He died trying to help build a school for children in Afghanistan. Jamie's face crumpled with shame and regret. The reality of what they had done was finally sinking in completely. This wasn't about abstract politics or distant policies. This was about real people with real stories and real consequences. I'm so sorry, Jamie whispered. I didn't know. I didn't think. No, Maria said firmly. You didn't think. But now you will. She turned to Detective Chun. Officer, what happens to this child? The question would determine not just Jamie's immediate future, but the direction this entire incident would take. The media was watching, the community was divided, and 2 families were about to be forever connected by one moment of misguided anger. What Maria Hernandez said next would shock everyone present and create a ripple effect that would spread far beyond Portland city limits. Maria Hernandez held the photograph of her son close to her chest, studying Jamie's tear-stained face with the penetrating gaze of a mother who had already lost everything that mattered most to her. The plaza had fallen completely silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft clicking of camera shutters capturing this unexpected confrontation. "Officer Chun," Maria said finally, her voice carrying the weight of grief and wisdom, "my son died believing he was making the world better for young people like this one." She gestured toward Jamie, who was trembling in handcuffs. "If I demand punishment, what does that teach anyone? If I demand revenge, how does that honor his memory?" Detective Chun shifted uncomfortably. In 20 years of police work, she had never encountered a situation quite like this. Victims' families usually demanded maximum prosecution, not philosophical discussions about justice and forgiveness. "Mrs. Hernandez," Chun began carefully, "I understand your feelings, but assault is a crime regardless of your personal wishes. There are legal procedures we have to follow." Marcus stepped forward, paint still dripping slowly from his uniform onto the concrete below. "What if there was another way?" he asked. "Something that could actually make a difference instead of just filling out paperwork." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. Alex Rivera found herself caught between her role as a protest organizer and her growing understanding that this situation had moved far beyond simple activism into something more complex and human. "What are you thinking?" Detective Chun asked Marcus warily. "Community service," Marcus replied, "but not picking up trash or painting over graffiti. Something real." He looked directly at Jamie. "I want them to spend a month volunteering at the VA hospital. I want them to meet other veterans, hear their stories, understand that we're not symbols or statistics. We're people." Jamie's eyes widened. "You wanted to work with veterans? After what I did?" "Especially after what you did," Marcus said firmly. "How can you have an opinion about military service if you've never actually talked to people who served?" He gestured to the paint covering his uniform. "You attacked what you thought I represented. Now I want you to meet who I actually am." Patricia Vance, the young journalist covering the story, stepped closer with her microphone. This was exactly the kind of human interest story that could make her career. "Are you saying you want to turn your attacker into some kind of advocate?" "I'm saying I want to turn a mistake into an opportunity to learn," Marcus replied. "For both of us." Detective Chin's radio crackled with a message from her supervisor. The incident was already trending on social media, and city officials were demanding answers. She needed to make a decision quickly before the situation spiraled further out of control. "I can't just ignore an assault," Chin said. "There has to be some official response." Maria Hernandez stepped closer to Jamie, studying their young face with eyes that had seen too much loss. "How old are you, child?" 17, Jamie whispered. "My Tommy was 19 when he died," Maria said quietly. "Not much older than you. If he were here today, what do you think he would want to happen?" Jamie struggled to find words. "I don't know. I don't know anything about him except what you've told me." "Then, learn," Maria said simply. "Marcus is offering you a chance to understand what you attacked today. If you're truly sorry, you'll take it." Alex Rivera watched the exchange with growing amazement. She had organized dozens of protests, faced police lines, been arrested multiple times for civil disobedience. But she had never seen anything like this moral complexity playing out in real time. "Jamie," Alex called out, "whatever you decide, the group will support you. But think carefully about what's being offered here." Detective Chun made a decision that would probably require extensive paperwork and several uncomfortable conversations with her superiors. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced to the crowd. "Jamie Chun is being charged with assault in the 4th degree. However, given the victim's request and the circumstances, I'm recommending pretrial diversion." She turned to Jamie directly. "That means if you complete community service and meet certain conditions, the charges could be dismissed. But this isn't getting off easy. This is getting a chance to make things right." Jamie nodded eagerly. "I'll do whatever you want. I'm so sorry for what I did." "Sorry isn't enough," Marcus said, not unkindly. Sorry is just words. I need to see action. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact. I'm calling a volunteer coordinator at the VA hospital. If you're serious about this, you'll start tomorrow. The crowd was processing what they had witnessed. Many of the protesters had come expecting to make statements about military policy, not to witness this kind of personal reconciliation. Some of the veterans who had gathered were equally surprised by Marcus's response. Frank Rodriguez, the older veteran who had offered Marcus water earlier, approached with concern written on his weathered face. Marcus, son, are you sure about this? That kid attacked you. They don't deserve your kindness. It's not about what they deserve, Marcus replied. It's about what Tommy would have wanted. He believed in second chances and education over punishment. He looked at his ruined uniform. This thing can be replaced. But if Jamie learns something from this experience, maybe other people won't make the same mistake. The memorial service for Tommy Hernandez had been scheduled to start 30 minutes ago, but Maria seemed unconcerned about the delay. She was watching Jamie with the intensity of someone trying to see into their soul. Child, she said to Jamie, do you understand what service means? Not just military service, but any kind of service to others. Jamie thought carefully before answering. I thought I did. I volunteer at the food bank and participate in cleanup days. But I guess I've never really served anyone who disagreed with me politically. Service isn't about politics, Marcus said. It's about putting other people's needs before your own comfort. It's about doing hard things because they're right, not because they're popular. A city councilwoman named Rebecca Torres had arrived at the scene after hearing about the incident on the news. She was known for her progressive positions on military spending and had been planning to attend the protest before everything changed. This is unprecedented, Councilwoman Torres said, approaching Detective Chun. A hate crime turning into a community service opportunity? The media is going to have a field day with this. It's not a hate crime, Chun corrected. It's an assault born from ignorance and passion, which is different. Hate is intentional. This was impulsive. Torres studied the scene. Marcus in his paint-covered uniform, Jamie in handcuffs looking terrified and remorseful, Maria holding her son's photograph, and the crowd of onlookers recording everything. How do we explain this to the public? We tell the truth, Marcus said simply. A young person made a terrible mistake, but instead of just punishing them, we're trying to educate them. Sometimes that's how real change happens. Jamie's phone buzzed again with messages. Their friends had seen videos of the incident online and were frantically asking what was happening. The story was spreading with various interpretations, some calling Jamie a hero for standing up to militarism, others calling them a criminal who attacked a veteran. The internet is going crazy about this, Patricia Vance reported, scrolling through social media on her phone. People are choosing sides without knowing the full story. People always choose sides, Alex Rivera observed. It's easier than thinking. She looked at Jamie with newfound respect. But maybe this time, someone can learn to see beyond sides. Detective Chun removed Jamie's handcuffs, but kept them close at hand. You're being released to your parents' custody, pending your court date. But first, you're going with Marcus and Mrs. Hernandez to complete the memorial service you interrupted. Jamie's face went pale. You want me to attend the funeral? It's not a funeral, Maria corrected gently. It's a celebration of his life. There's a difference. She handed Jamie the bouquet of flowers she had brought. These were for Tommy. I think he would want you to have them. The gesture nearly broke Jamie's composure entirely. Taking flowers meant for a dead soldier from his grieving mother felt like accepting a responsibility too heavy to bear. I don't deserve these, Jamie whispered. No, Maria agreed. You don't. But Tommy believed in earning redemption through service, not just remorse. Carry them with you, and remember that somebody loved my son enough to mourn him properly. As the group prepared to move toward the Veterans Memorial for the delayed ceremony, word spread through social media that something extraordinary was happening in Portland. Videos of the confrontation were being shared millions of times, but the context was being lost in the viral spread. Some posts portrayed Jamie as a brave activist standing up to military oppression. Others showed Marcus as a saint-like figure offering forgiveness to his attacker. Neither version captured the messy, complex reality of what was actually occurring. Marcus looked at his watch. We're an hour late for Tommy's service. His other friends are probably wondering what happened. He turned to the crowd that had gathered. This isn't a show. This is real life. If you want to come to pay respects to a fallen soldier, you're welcome. If you just want content for your social media, please stay here. About half the crowd dispersed, but a core group of protesters, veterans, and curious citizens followed as Marcus, Maria, and Jamie walked the 6 blocks to the Veterans Memorial. Detective Chun and her partner provided escort, still unsure exactly what they were witnessing. The memorial service that followed would prove to be unlike anything any of them had ever experienced, as Jamie came face to face with the real human cost of the abstraction they had attacked that morning. What happened there would change not only Jamie's understanding of military service, but challenge everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about patriotism, protest, and the possibilities for reconciliation in a deeply divided community. The Portland Veterans Memorial stood in quiet dignity beneath tall oak trees, their leaves rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. As the unusual procession arrived, Jamie clutched Maria Hernandez's flowers with trembling hands, still unable to process how dramatically their day had changed from angry protester to reluctant mourner. About 20 people had already gathered for Tommy's memorial service, most of them young veterans from his unit and their families. They turned in surprise as they saw Marcus approaching in his paint-stained uniform, followed by an elderly woman, a teenager carrying flowers, 2 police detectives, and several news crews. "Marcus, what the hell happened to you?" called out a tall black veteran named Sergeant First Class Kevin Johnson. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with Marcus and Tommy, and his concern was immediately visible as he took in the paint covering his friend's dress blues. "Long story, Kev," Marcus replied. "This is Jamie. They're the reason I'm late, but they're also the reason this service is going to mean more than we planned." The veterans exchanged confused glances. Several family members who had come to honor Tommy looked at Jamie with suspicion, sensing something unusual about their presence, but not understanding what. Maria Hernandez stepped forward to address the small crowd. "My friends, this young person made a terrible mistake today. They attacked Marcus because they were angry about war and military policies." The crowd tensed, and several veterans stepped protectively closer to Marcus. "But instead of demanding punishment, we've asked them to learn, to understand who Tommy really was." Jamie felt the weight of every gaze upon them. Standing in this sacred space, surrounded by people grieving a young soldier's death, the abstraction of their morning protest dissolved into stark, uncomfortable reality. These weren't symbols or statistics. They were real people mourning a real loss. "I don't belong here," Jamie whispered to Marcus. "I should go. You belong here more than anyone," Marcus replied firmly. "You need to understand what you attacked this morning." He gestured toward a simple memorial stone bearing Tommy's name alongside dozens of others. Every name on this wall represents someone's son or daughter, someone's friend, someone's future that was cut short. Detective Sarah Chun positioned herself at the edge of the group, radio turned low but ready. She was still uncertain about the legal implications of what was unfolding, but she recognized something important was happening beyond her normal jurisdiction. Patricia Vance set up her camera at a respectful distance, understanding that she was documenting something potentially historic. Her editor had been calling constantly as the story spread across social media, demanding live updates and exclusive footage. An older chaplain named Father Michael arrived to conduct the service. He had ministered to military families for 30 years and had seen grief in all its forms, but he paused when he saw the unusual composition of today's gathering. "Mrs. Hernandez," Father Michael said gently, "is everything all right? Who are these people?" Maria quickly explained the morning's events while Tommy's friends and fellow veterans listened with growing amazement. The idea that their friend's memorial service would include his attacker seemed impossible to process. Kevin Johnson approached Jamie directly, his expression unreadable. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like a linebacker, he presented an intimidating presence. Jamie instinctively stepped backward. "You threw paint at Marcus?" Kevin asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes," Jamie whispered, barely audible. "Because you hate the military?" Jamie struggled to find words. Because I thought. I was angry about wars and military spending and you decided Marcus was responsible for all of that. Kevin's voice rose slightly, causing other veterans to turn their attention toward the confrontation. "Kevin," Marcus intervened. "Easy. They're here to learn." "Learn?" Kevin's laugh held no humor. "Tommy is dead. Marcus. Really dead. And this kid thinks throwing paint makes some kind of statement about that." The tension was escalating rapidly. Several veterans moved closer, their protective instincts activated by Kevin's anger. Jamie found themselves surrounded by people who had every reason to hate them. But then something unexpected happened. A young woman stepped forward from among the mourners. She was petite, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a black dress and holding a small American flag. "Stop," she said quietly, but her voice carried authority that made everyone pause. "I'm Carmen Hernandez, Tommy's sister, and I want to hear what this person has to say." Jamie looked at Carmen with shock. They hadn't considered that Tommy might have siblings, that their attack on Marcus had also been an attack on an entire family's grief. "You're his sister?" Jamie asked weakly. "I am," Carmen replied. "I'm also a sophomore at Portland State, studying social work. I've been to protests. I've questioned military policies. But I've never thrown paint at someone." She studied Jamie carefully. "Why did you do it?" The question was simple, but cut to the heart of everything. Jamie realized they had never been forced to articulate their motivations to someone who might actually understand both their anger and their target. "I was angry," Jamie began slowly, "about everything. Climate change, inequality, military spending while people are homeless. I saw the uniform and just exploded. I didn't think about the person wearing it." "So you attacked a symbol," Carmen said. "But symbols don't bleed. People do." She gestured toward Marcus's paint-stained uniform. "My brother bled in Afghanistan. For real, not symbolically." Father Michael decided to begin the service despite the unusual circumstances. "We gather today, not in anger, but in memory. Thomas Hernandez was 19 years old when he gave his life for his beliefs. Whether we agree with those beliefs or not, we can honor his courage." As the chaplain spoke, Jamie found themselves listening to stories about Tommy that shattered their preconceptions. Kevin Johnson talked about how Tommy had insisted on learning Pashto so he could communicate with Afghan children. Carmen shared how her brother had sent most of his military pay home to help their mother with medical bills. Marcus spoke last, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the day. "Tommy didn't die for abstract policies or political ideologies. He died trying to help build a school so kids could learn to read. He believed education was the path to peace." He looked directly at Jamie. "He would have agreed with a lot of your goals. He just chose a different way to pursue them." The revelation hit Jamie like a physical blow. Tommy Hernandez hadn't been some mindless tool of militarism. He had been someone trying to make the world better in his own way. Someone not unlike Jamie themselves, just with different methods and beliefs about how change happens. "I threw paint at his memory," Jamie said suddenly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I dishonored someone who was trying to help kids get an education." Tears streamed down their face. "How do I make that right?" Maria Hernandez stepped forward and took Jamie's hands in hers. "You make it right by learning, by serving, by becoming the kind of person Tommy would have wanted to meet." Carmen added her own perspective. "My brother believed that people could change, that understanding was possible even between enemies. If you're serious about making this right, prove him correct." Detective Chun received a call from her supervisor. The incident was now national news, with commentators and politicians using it to advance various agendas. Some were calling for Jamie to be prosecuted as a domestic terrorist. Others were holding them up as a brave activist. None of the commentary reflected the complex reality she was witnessing. Detective Her supervisor said over the radio, "We need a statement for the media. How do we explain this situation?" Chen looked around at the memorial service. Veterans standing beside protesters, a grieving mother offering forgiveness, a teenager learning hard truths about the complexity of moral choices. "We tell them that justice isn't always about punishment," she replied. "Sometimes it's about transformation." As the formal service concluded, people began to disperse. But Tommy's friends and family didn't leave immediately. They seemed drawn to continue the conversation that had started so unexpectedly. Alex Rivera, who had remained quietly in the background throughout the memorial, approached Jamie with something like awe. "I've organized 100 protests," she said quietly, "but I've never seen anything like this. You threw paint at a veteran this morning, and now you're part of their memorial service." "I don't know what I am anymore," Jamie admitted. "Everything I thought I knew seems wrong." Marcus overheard the conversation and joined them. "Nothing you believed was wrong," he said. "Being angry about injustice is right. Wanting to make the world better is right. But methods matter. Understanding matters. You can't fight for people if you don't understand them." Kevin Johnson, who had been the most hostile toward Jamie initially, surprised everyone by approaching them directly. "Marcus says you're going to volunteer at the VA hospital." Jamie nodded nervously. "I volunteer there too," Kevin said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays helping guys with PTSD. If you're serious about learning, you can work with me." The offer was unexpected and generous, given Kevin's earlier anger. It represented a possibility for real reconciliation that went beyond symbolic gestures. As the group prepared to leave the memorial, Jamie realized their phone had been buzzing constantly with messages and calls. The story had exploded on social media, with people they had never met arguing about their actions and motivations. But standing in this quiet memorial space, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate them, but were instead offering opportunities for growth and understanding, Jamie began to comprehend that real change happened not through viral moments or symbolic gestures, but through the difficult, unglamorous work of building bridges between different perspectives. What would happen when this story reached its full potential for both healing and division remained to be seen, but the foundation for something remarkable had been laid in Portland's Veterans Memorial that afternoon. 3 weeks later, Jamie Chun stood in the hallway of the Portland VA Medical Center, wearing scrubs and carrying a clipboard filled with patient visit schedules. The transformation from angry protester to healthcare volunteer had been more difficult and more meaningful than anyone could have predicted. The national media had moved on to other stories, but the local impact continued to ripple through Portland's community. Jamie's first day at the hospital had been awkward and uncomfortable, with several veterans recognizing them from news coverage and reacting with everything from curiosity to outright hostility. "Room 247 is asking for you specifically," said Nurse Janet Murphy, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had initially been skeptical about having the paint thrower volunteer in her ward. "Says he wants to talk to the kid who attacked Marcus Williams." Jamie's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Even 3 weeks later, facing veterans who knew their story remained intimidating. But they had learned that courage meant doing difficult things, not avoiding them. Room 247 housed Robert "Bobby" Torres, a 24-year-old Marine who had lost both legs to an IED in Iraq. He was scheduled for discharge the following week after months of rehabilitation and physical therapy. When Jamie knocked and entered, Bobby looked up from his wheelchair with eyes that held both pain and curiosity. "So you're the famous paint thrower," Bobby said without preamble. "Sit down. I want to understand something." Jamie sat in the visitor's chair, prepared for anger or accusation. Instead, Bobby's question surprised them. "Why Marcus?" Bobby asked. There were probably a dozen vets at that plaza that morning. "Why did you target him specifically?" The question forced Jamie to confront something they had been avoiding. "I didn't target him specifically," they admitted. "I just saw the uniform and reacted. It could have been anyone." "So you attacked what the uniform represented to you," Bobby said thoughtfully. "Not the person wearing it." "Yes," Jamie said quietly. "I realize now how wrong that was." Bobby wheeled his chair closer. "You know what's interesting? I've been thinking about symbols a lot lately. He gestured toward his missing legs. These stumps have become a symbol too. Some people see them and think war victim. Others see American hero. But I'm just Bobby, you know? I like basketball and terrible reality TV shows. The conversation was unlike what Jamie had expected. Instead of anger, Bobby seemed genuinely interested in understanding their perspective, even while challenging it. The thing is, Bobby continued, symbols are shortcuts. They let us avoid the hard work of actually getting to know people. He pointed toward the window, where they could see protesters with anti-war signs gathering across the street. Those people out there, they see my wheelchair and think they know my story, just like you saw Marcus's uniform and thought you knew his. Jamie followed Bobby's gaze to the protesters. 3 weeks ago, they might have been among them. Now, having spent time listening to veterans' actual experiences, the simplicities of their previous activism felt inadequate. I used to be so sure about everything, Jamie said. Anti-war meant good, military meant bad. It seemed obvious. Life isn't that simple, Bobby replied. I enlisted because my neighborhood had no opportunities. The military gave me education, discipline, purpose. It also cost me my legs. Both things can be true. Down the hall, Marcus Williams was completing his own volunteer shift, reading to patients who were struggling with literacy issues. His paint-stained uniform had been replaced, but the experience had changed him too. He found himself questioning things he had previously taken for granted about civilian perspectives on military service. Dr. Sarah Kim, the hospital's chief psychiatrist, had been documenting the unusual volunteer arrangement as a potential case study in restorative justice. She approached Jamie between patient visits to check on their progress. How are you handling the emotional weight of this work? Dr. Kim asked. It can't be easy, especially given how you got here. Jamie considered the question carefully. It's hard, but not in the way I expected. I thought the veterans would hate me. Most of them are just curious. They want to understand what I was thinking, and they want me to understand them. That's encouraging, Dr. Kim said. What's the most difficult part? Realizing how wrong I was about everything, Jamie admitted. Not about war being bad. I still believe violence should be a last resort. But about the people who serve. I had them in a box marked enemy without ever actually knowing them. Dr. Kim made notes on her clipboard. The ability to hold complex, sometimes contradictory ideas simultaneously is a sign of intellectual maturity. It sounds like you're developing that capacity. In a recreation room, Kevin Johnson was leading a group therapy session for veterans dealing with PTSD. Jamie had been invited to observe part of their education about the long-term consequences of military service. The conversation was raw and difficult, with veterans sharing experiences that challenged every assumption Jamie had held about military life. People think we came home heroes, said a veteran named Lisa Martinez, who had served in Afghanistan as a medic. But I came home with nightmares and panic attacks. The military trained me to save lives, but they didn't train me how to live with the ones I couldn't save. Another veteran, Michael Chong, nodded in agreement. Civilians either worship us or blame us, but they don't want to know us. It's easier to have opinions about symbols than to deal with complicated people. Jamie listened with growing understanding. The veterans weren't asking for blind support or uncritical praise. They were asking for the same thing Jamie had wanted from their protest, to be seen as human beings with complex motivations and experiences. After the session, Kevin approached Jamie privately. You've been here 3 weeks. What have you learned? Jamie thought carefully before answering. I've learned that I was protesting the right things for the wrong reasons. I was against war because I thought all soldiers were mindless killers. Now I'm against war because I've met the people who actually fight them. Kevin smiled, the first genuine warmth he had shown Jamie since their first confrontation. That's progress. You're starting to understand that you can support soldiers while questioning the wars they're sent to fight. The insight was revolutionary for Jamie. They had always seen military service and anti-war activism as incompatible opposites. But working alongside veterans who shared many of their concerns about American foreign policy had revealed a more nuanced reality. Carmen Hernandez visited the hospital regularly, partly to support the veterans and partly to check on Jamie's progress. She found him in the cafeteria during their lunch break, looking thoughtful and tired. "How are you holding up?" Carmen asked, sitting down across from Jamie with her own lunch tray. "Some days are harder than others," Jamie admitted. "Yesterday, I met a veteran who lost 3 friends in a convoy attack. He's the same age as me, but he's carrying weight I can't even imagine." "That's Tommy's weight too, in a way," Carmen said quietly. "He carried the responsibility of trying to make something good come from all the loss and violence he witnessed." Jamie looked up sharply. "Do you think he would have forgiven me for what I did?" Carmen considered the question seriously. Tommy believed that people could change if they were willing to do the work. "The fact that you're here, listening to these stories, learning about the human cost of the policies you were protesting, I think he would have respected that." News reporter Patricia Vance had returned to Portland to follow up on the story that had launched her career into national prominence. She found Jamie in the hospital parking lot after their shift, looking very different from the angry teenager in a black mask she had first encountered. "Any regrets about that morning 3 weeks ago?" Patricia asked, camera rolling. Jamie thought for a long moment. "I regret throwing the paint. I regret attacking Marcus without knowing anything about him. But I don't regret caring about the issues that made me angry. I just understand now that caring isn't enough. You have to understand what you're fighting for. And what are you fighting for now?" "The same things," Jamie said. "Peace, justice, an end to unnecessary violence. But now I know that those goals require building bridges, not throwing paint. They require understanding people who disagree with you, not demonizing them." As Patricia wrapped up the interview, Marcus Williams emerged from the hospital after completing his own volunteer shift. He approached Jamie with something like pride in his expression. "Dr. Kim says you're one of their most dedicated volunteers," Marcus said. "That you're thinking about studying social work in college." Jamie nodded. "I want to work with veterans, maybe help them transition back to civilian life. It seems like there's a real need for people who understand both sides." "Tommy would have liked that," Marcus said. "He always said the best way to honor service was to serve others." 6 months later, Jamie Chun would enroll at Portland State University to study social work, with a specialization in veteran services. They would continue volunteering at the VA hospital throughout college, eventually helping to develop programs that brought together veterans and civilian activists to work on shared goals. The paint stain had been cleaned from Pioneer Courthouse Square, but the story lived on as an example of how human connection could transform conflict into understanding. It became a case study taught in conflict resolution programs, a reminder that even the deepest divisions could be bridged by people willing to see beyond symbols to the human beings beneath. Marcus Williams and Jamie Chin never became close friends, but they developed a respectful partnership in veteran advocacy. Maria Hernandez remained involved in both their lives, serving as a bridge between grief and hope, between loss and the possibility of redemption. The city of Portland, initially frozen by the stark division between protesters and patriots, found itself with a more complex story to tell, one about the possibility of growth, forgiveness, and the difficult work of building understanding across ideological divides. It wasn't the simple narrative that either side had wanted, but it was truer to the messy, complicated reality of how change actually happens in human communities. Years later, when Jamie would speak to groups about that morning in Pioneer Courthouse Square, they would always end with the same message: throwing paint is easy. Building bridges is hard. But only one of them actually changes anything.